Check one, two, three. Hey everybody, it's Michael Helms, also known as Michael the Sound Guy, and this is the Location Sound Podcast. You know, each episode we talk with location sound mixers, boom ops, and other industry pros about the various aspects of recording sound on location, whether it's for feature and independent films, TV commercials, interviews, any time where dialogue from actors is recorded. I started my career in the recording studios in New York City with some of the big artists back in the day, and later on projects for networks like HBO, Sci-Fi Channel, and the Cartoon Network. As time went by, I got out of the studio and began working in production sound. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or just starting out, thanks for joining us. My guest today is currently a film and television professor at SCAD, which is the Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia, but he has worked on many features over the years as a production sound mixer, boom op, sound designer, and sound effects recordist on films like Lincoln, Star Wars III, Revenge of the Sith, Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and numerous IMAX films. Please welcome my guest, Greg Smith.
Hey, Michael, what's up?
Thanks for joining us, Greg.
My pleasure. It's and that's a great little intro. It's great to be here and doing the thing I love to do, which is talk about the craft.
Excellent. So now, Greg, I know you're teaching at SCAD right now, but we usually start off the show by asking, when you are working as a location sound mixer or a sound effects recordist, what's your preferred audio kit? Just a rundown of your mixer, recorder, preferred mics, and everything in between.
Oh, cool. Really good question. Great way to start off. I've been using a lot of the same gear for years, and so some of it is tried and true. Some of it is new. In fact, I just redid my kit this summer. It's funny you should ask, because actually you mentioned in the intro that I teach film and television, which I do at SCAD, but I also teach sound design, and I specialize in teaching location sound and location sound effects recording. So one of the things that we sort of stumbled on is the new Sound Devices MixPre recorders, the 3 and the 6. Do you know those guys?
I do. I actually have a MixPre 10T.
Oh, you got a 10T? Awesome. Someday I want to grow up and get a 10T. But just for my basic kit, for years I've had everything. The latest version that I had in my kit, just for the basic, what I call my SWAT kit, which is you hire me and I'm sort of run and gun stuff, was the basic kit was a Sound Devices 744T that I had for years. And I also had a backup 722. But not a T, not a time code version of it. And I had those two recorders, and that's in my basic kit. So just this last year, when the MixPres came out, we cut a deal with an audio house up in Atlanta and had them send down a couple of the MixPre 3s and the 6s, and also the 10, and we field tested them for the college. And I was asked to make the decision or part of the team actually, that made the decision to say, yes, absolutely, this is the wave of the future. We've got to go with this. So as part of that, I also this summer purchased a MixPre 6. So it's literally sitting in the box. I got it like 2 days ago from Sweetwater. If anybody needs a guy out at Sweetwater called Stuart Niven, he's been setting me up for years. He's a great guy. I don't know if I can say that on your podcast or not. Sure. He's a good guy. Anyway, so the MixPre 6, that's going to go in my kit, and that's going to be a basic sort of, recorder platform. I carry 2 basic mics in the field. Again, a lot of this is, and we'll get into this in our discussion, but a lot of this has to do with if I'm doing location sound where there are multiple actors and things like that, I'll go out and rent different kinds of gear for that. But a lot of the stuff I do for IMAX is basically you've got to be able to carry it on your back, because we do a lot of stuff in jungles and in deserts and running around. So I have a basic kit, but as I said, the 2 recorders. Plus, I carry 2 basic microphones, and these are the 2 microphones I've carried for many, many years. And it's a Sanken CMS7, which has been around for, it must be 20 plus years. And I've had it forever. It's a switchable stereo field, so you can dial it in. It's an MS mic, a single point MS mic, and you can dial it in from either 0 degrees or all the way to, I think, to 127. I think it's 0, 60, 90, 110, 120, 127. I think that's it. I may be off on one of those, but it's the most awesomest mic in the world because it has such wonderful resonance and really clarity, both in the lows, the mids, and the highs. It's single point stereo, so we don't have to, worry about two mono mics and the XY nonsense that we used to have to do back in the day. And this mic, I challenge anyone to find a better single point stereo mic. I don't even know if they still make it. I think there's a CMS 10, which was kind of the one that sort of followed that. It's kind of a dialed down version of it. But that's a mic I can record stereo on, or you can dial it to zero. And as I said, it's an MS mic, but it also has in the preamp box that it comes with, you can either record straight MS, or you can have it decode stereo left right. So, and then once you go to the dial wheel, you can put it on zero, and so you're sending twin track mono, or you can click it up to whatever you want, 90-degree stereo, and you've got a true stereo mic. And it's just a cool little microphone. The other one I carry is a mono microphone, is just the good old Sennheiser 416. Which we all use in our I use it in my television work. We use it everywhere, and I actually use it in the field. And I've had it for years. I've had it for years because I never lend my gear out, so I don't worry about people dropping microphones. And then I added one other microphone just about 6 months ago. Oh, I'm going to get this wrong. I think it's the the Audio Technica. I think it's the 8022. I'd have to look it up. It's another single point stereo mic. It's basically locked in at 90 degrees, but it's got good resonance. And I used it initially when I got here to SCAD in Savannah. We created a TV program on a soundstage, and I needed good single point stereo mics for audience reaction. And we put 3 of them up there, and it was just great. And it's cheap. It's like $3.99. And so I bought one, and I threw that in the kit as well, just to have an extra one for, doing ambiances out in the field and stuff like that. And then, various other things. The basic headphones are the good old Sony MDR 7506s, which used to be the MDR V6s, I think, 1,000 years ago. And I use those in my studio, and I use those in the field. And I can wax poetic about headphones, all day long if you want me to. But those headphones I've had for years, and they really hold up, and they give a really true recording, really true sort of sound. So that's the basic kit. Lots of other little bells and whistles that I've added over the years, but that's kind of the basics.
All right, that's great. Now, when you started, were you recording on the Nagra?
Yes. You want to hear a funny story?
Yes.
So I started recording actually when I was like 10 or 12 years old. I can go back over some of that stuff if you want, but that was basically recording rock and roll with my friends in my friend Rich Krentz's basement, where his mother would hang the sheets to dry because their dryer was broken, and those became our sound baffles. And we had like a crappy TIAC 4-track cassette recorder, and we would do reduction mixes. If you don't know what those are, ladies and gentlemen, look it up on the web, and Google reduction mixes and Beatles, and they'll tell you how they would record like 3 tracks and then reduce it to 1 and then add 3 more. So essentially a 6-track recording. It's how they did most of their records, actually. But Nagra, I came into it. I got a job at Lucasfilm. I was at NPR, and through a various circuitous route, I ended up at Lucasfilm in their sound department, and I was what they called us droids, and that was just a sound assistant. And so most of my day was transferring 1/4-inch tape from the location sound people in the field from their Nagras, and it would come in, and I would take the reel, and I would transfer it to 35 millimeter. We'd call it MAG, which is 35 millimeter magnetic film, and that's how we used to do it. So I spent, when I got there, I knew a lot about recording, and I knew a lot about studios and stuff. So I got hired on an entry-level position there. After about 3 months, I got called into the soundstage by the gods of Lucasfilm, who later became mentors and then friends. Guys like Ben Burt and Randy Tom and Gary Summers were the original 3 sound designers at Lucasfilm. They called themselves the Wolverines. So I was just a lowly droid. I got called into the stage one day, and they said, "You know how to run a Nagra, don't you?" And I said, "Sure." And they said, "Great, we need the sound of for a movie they were doing called The Mean Season," with Kurt Russell and I think Mariel Hemingway and Richard Jordan, who played the serial killer. It's a great movie. Go check it out. We need the sound, they said, of a Volkswagen distributor cap being pulled off, kind of sound like that. So go find one and go record it. And I said, great. So I, of course, knew nothing about Inagra, but I recognized an opportunity. And I tell this to my students, which is, it's always good to take chances, but, make them calculated and educated guesses. So I took a calculated risk that I could figure it out. I went down to what they called the Inagra closet, which is where we had 10 of them. We had both mono and stereo, but they had the 4.2 mono and a 4S, which was the stereo one. So I got the 4S and went through it, and we had great gear. That's where I found the Sanken mic, actually. I first used it there. And one of the secretaries who worked at Lucasfilm at that time had a 1969 Volkswagen. And I went over to her house that night and pulled off the distributor cap, very proudly walked in the next day with a 1/4-inch tape and handed it to the gods. And they racked it up immediately and flew it right into the mix right in front of me. And they said, great, okay. And then he pulls out a napkin. It was Gary Summers. He pulled out a napkin. And Gary was great. Gary always said, when he would see you, he goes, sup, S-U-P, sup. Hey, Greg, sup. And I'd say, here's your sound of the distributor cap. Boom, great, okay. And he took a napkin. He wrote down 10 things. Here, get these 10 things, and I need them by tomorrow. And that started the next stage of my career. So it's just, you see an opportunity to jump at it, but that was the Inagra. That's how I learned Inagra, through fear. And, eventually bought one of my own and ended up carrying that 35-pound pig through jungles and deserts and on the oceans and, snows of China in the mountains and everywhere. It's I have a permanent stoop on my right shoulder because of it.
Oh, that's great.
And I still have my Inagra, and I still show my students how to use it because there's actually I'm sorry, I'm babbling on, but there's also a great story about Inagra versus digital when recording artillery, which asked me about if you want me to go off in that direction, because there's a reason to still use Inagra in this world of ours. Is the point I was going to make.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell us.
Okay, so there was at some point I was working on some Civil War movie we did. Might have been Gods and Generals. So I was still at Lucasfilm, and there was an artillery shoot. They called it up in Michigan at a place called Fort Grayling, and I went up there, and they were firing off cannons from the ages, they called it, and it went back to like Revolutionary War cannons and Civil War cannons and Spanish-American War and First World War, Second World War, Vietnam War, and current. And they had all of this artillery on this firing range in Fort Grayling up in Michigan. So I took digital recorders. I had a couple of digital recorders. I think the digital recorder I had at that time was the HHB was a British company, and they made the PDR 1000, and that was a DAT. And so I had a couple of those, and I also had a Inagra 4S, and I also had a crappy little boombox cassette recorder. So I put microphones all over the place. I actually went downrange. I brought 1,000 feet of mic cable, so I was beyond the firing line. So you get the sound of the shells going overhead. I put microphones and recorders down near the impact site, hoping that they wouldn't blow up my recorder, and then had Inagras and the cassette recorder at the firing line. So we recorded all this stuff, and the interesting thing is the digital recorder made it sound, just like you would expect it to sound. And anybody out there has ever heard a cannon go boom, or mostly a gunshot is another good way to put it. It sounds pretty lame. It just sounds like a, pop like that. But, what do we expect to hear? We expect to hear, right? That kind of crunchy kind of thingy. That's what happens when you record it with an analog machine, because it hits the ceiling. You don't want to overload it too much, but you want it like a little crispy, right? So, and actually one of the best recordings of the big 32-pounder Civil War siege gun was the cassette recorder that we played back in the big studio in stereo, and it sounded awesome. And so, we would use the digital recorders to be able to, have that nice low end, but we would mix in the cassette recorder and the Inagra recordings, the analog recordings, with the digital to give it that nice sort of wonderful crispy sound that we expect to hear in analog. And then the other story is I'm working. Well, I say I'm still working, but there's a documentary that I'm doing with my old friend Ben Bird, who is still at Lucasfilm. Actually, I don't know if you're audience knows Ben Burtt, but Ben's won 4 Oscars for sound, and he won a special Oscar for he made up all the sounds of the lightsaber. And Google him, and you'll be amazed. I still he's one of my oldest friends, but I still marvel every time I think I've done something, and I go to bed and I say, "Hey Ben, I did this." He goes, "Yeah, we did that back in like 19." So, in fact, I'm looking at your face on this. Your listeners don't know we can see each other. You actually look a lot like him.
Oh, really?
You do, yeah. You look a lot like him. It's very funny. I feel like I'm talking to Ben. So he and I were working on a documentary about something we're calling the greatest gunshot ever recorded. And this was a passion project of Ben's. He came to me and we were talking over the phone. And he documented that some recordings done in Lone Pine, California back in it might be the late 40s, early 50s. It was a movie that no one saw called Rocky Mountain, I think. And these guys took a portable recorder, which filled the back of a pickup truck, out to Lone Pine, California, and recorded some gunshots. And then for this movie, the location people there went to a place just outside of Gallup, New Mexico, at a place called Red Rocks. And they recorded the gunshots there. And those gunshots, Ben was able to trace that gunshot from that original recording in that movie, Rocky Mountain, with Errol Flynn. Look it up. It's an awful movie, but those were the first gunshots. That's the holy grail of gunshots. It's part of the documentary. We document it, and this was the first time it was used. And we can document it that it was used in at least one film every year up to the present. Those gunshots. And it's the iconic kind of just wonderful. You know it when you hear it. And the ricochets are burr, burr, this kind of little sounds like that. It's awesome. And all these gunshots, these were these guys, and they went to this place, and we had pictures of the film. So we took like 4 digital recorders, and we took a Winchester rifle and I had a 45 caliber pistol, and we took it out to there, and we didn't know where they had filmed it. We just had black and white stills, screen grabs from the film. So we went out there and we spent 2 days driving around Gallup, New Mexico, until we found the field. And it was actually a field that was owned by a Native American couple that lived there. And through an intermediary, we got permission to go into their back field. They thought we were crazy. We said, that's where they filmed it, the final battle where Errol Flynn, who plays this Confederate colonel, faces the Indians, and there's gunshots and stuff. And so it's a perfect amphitheater. It's the most natural amphitheater you've ever seen. It's about something about 150 feet straight up, and it's like you took an ice cream scoop out of the side of a straight up ridge. So it's perfectly sort of like half moon shaped, but straight up walls 150 feet. So we went into this thing, we spread out our recorders, and we recorded our stuff with our digital recorders and our guns. We got back to the studio, and it didn't sound anything like the gunshots. We were like, this is so disappointing. And then we sort of were talking about it one night, and I said, what we didn't do? We didn't use the right recorders, because they used analog recorders in those days, that natural, crispy sound. And we got the caliber of the guns slightly wrong as well. So we then went out and bought a 1873 Peacemaker 6-shot, like you see Wyatt Earp shooting. And we bought I think it's a 30-30 Winchester, maybe the 45-70. I forget which one. And we're going to go back someday, when both of us have a hole in our schedule. But we identified, and isn't that funny? Because that analog was the problem. And so anyway, that's sorry for the long tangent there, but it just shows that there's still a lot of worth and a place in the recording world for analog recordings. We go for clarity in digital, but analog still has got a real role in all that.
No, that's good. Yeah, when I started off in the recording studio, and that was a lot of the things that we would record. Sometimes certain groups wanted to record all their drums in analog, and then later we would transfer it to digital. But yeah, you get that natural tape compression, with all those, with the drums and the transients with the snares and things like that. So yeah, that's a great story though.
Was your studio one that, did you live through the transition where, you were analog and then one day you were digital, and there's this period for about 2 years because I was a studio owner, and for about 2 years we were both. Because there were people who just wouldn't do, like you mentioned the drums, same thing, we got to have analog,
Yeah, I was there, right? I was in the early 90s through the mid 90s. And we were still like, I was doing the music studio thing for a while, and so everything was pretty much analog with some digital, and then we were mastering, or we would, final mix went to DAT. But everybody still wanted to go to half inch, stereo a lot of times, and a lot of it was hip hop too. So there was they wanted that natural compression too. I worked with this guy one time though, and I remember we went to tape for the final mix, and the needles, they were pegged. They're like, and I was like, excuse me. And he was like, just wait. And we played it back, and it sounded so good. And I just, at the time, I'm thinking, but it's distorted. The needles were pegged. And it was a dance mix, and it was really good. So that was like one of my experiences there. And then I ended up working at a production house, and we were still doing 1/4 inch tape for the voiceover sessions and things like that. But we were doing DAT as well. But my boss still made us cut tape and splice, and he'd pull music library stuff and make us go to, put it on analog. And then he said, okay, take that 2-minute piece and make it a 30. And I wanted to end, because everybody just fades everything out at the end these days.
Yeah.
So he made us go to the end of the song, get that last little couple beats and do that. So I kind of, he made us do that, even though we were it was the dawn of the digital age. But I really enjoyed it, though. It was kind of, some nice memories doing that.
Yeah, that's a great story. And it just really points to the fact that, there is still a role for analog out there, I think. But this is not to say by any means, I love the digital world. I think the digital world, I tell my students this all the time, and which is that, we solved that problem. Digital, it's so clean and it's so wonderful. It's great. But I guess what I'm saying, and what I'm hearing from you as well, is there's still a place for analog. And it really comes back to, what one of my core beliefs in audio recording from the beginning has been trust your ears. Just like that guy said, just wait. He knew. And so, you just know. And people sometimes, you must get this question. Do you have people like ask you, what speakers do I buy for my home stereo system? And I always tell them, take a CD or something, if you can plug your phone in, of a song that you know really well, and take it to some store that's got a bank of speakers and play it through them and trust your ears. Don't buy the most expensive set. And that's has been my guiding principle through just about anything I've done with audio, through music or film or journalism. I worked at NPR for many years and all that stuff. So it's all the same. It's all the same gig, basically. But trust your ears. If it sounds good, it is good.
All right, Greg, you have worked on a ton of feature films over the years. Let's jump in and talk about a few of them. For our Star Wars fans, you worked on Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. What was your main role in that?
Well, it's actually, I worked on more than that. I worked on a bunch of Star Wars films. I think I arrived at Lucasfilm just as they finished Jedi. So actually my first Star Wars film was Jedi, as I worked in transference. I haven't updated my IMDb page for it in forever, but I did work on some of the post mixes and some of the foreigns. The foreign mixes were always fun. Darth Vader in Spanish, Darth Vader in Chinese. They're like, I think there were a dozen basic languages that we did. So that was my first Star Wars film. And then I worked on the prequels. I actually worked on all 3 of them.
Okay.
And I left Lucasfilm by that point, but once you leave Lucasfilm, you never really leave it. And I had made friends there. My friends used to joke that I couldn't hold down a job, but I would never quite leave one place. I would just sort of keep doing work for them. So I would get calls and they would say, we need some interesting motors and interesting animals for creatures. It's motors and creatures. Star Wars is all about motors and creatures because everything's like, all the droids and all this stuff. There's all these motor sounds. So I did that, and then all sorts of interesting animals. And I had done a bunch of films. So if I was working on another film, and I'll give you an example, I was working on a National Park Service film about the Badlands in South Dakota. And while we were there, we recorded herds of buffalo. And it has one of the biggest non-private herds of buffalo, wild buffalo in the nation, right there in the Badlands. And the National Park Service, kind of keeps an eye on them, takes care of them, but they're all over the place. And I heard, talking with some of the park people about the buffalo. Oh yeah, they make a great sound. And they have this wonderful kind of kind of good. I can't even, it's like James Earl Jones, but like 3 octaves down. And it's just this wonderful sort of growl. And I said, awesome. They said, yeah, but you got to get out there before dawn. And I'll tell you where to go, because where most of them are. Because what they do is they make this sound, and what the sound says is, this is Greg, I'm over here, and then Michael, I'm over here, and I'm Sally, I'm over here, and they kind of, this is how they sort of tell each other where they are. And they do it just before first light. So I guess they don't run into each other. So one morning I got up early and took my recorder and went out in my little rental car and turned it off and made sure I got on the road they tell me to be on. And when you turn off a car, it's a little recording tip is always make sure you leave yourself at least 10 minutes for the car to stop clicking and settling, because there's always little things in the belts and the creaks of the engine, little clicks and stuff like that. So I left myself enough time, had a good strong cup of coffee, had my recorder ready. And as the sun came up, I realized that I was surrounded by a buffalo herd. I hadn't seen them in the dark.
Wow. And
there was something like 600 buffalo on this prairie just surrounding the car. One was standing about 20 feet right in front of me, and I didn't see him until the first light came up. And he stared at me the whole time. And I kept the window down, but they came right up to it. I have one great recording of this buffalo coming up and putting his nose right in the driver's side window with me. And you hear this, he's kind of sniffing at my microphone. But just as the Park Service guy said, these awesome going, and it was great because it was almost like someone was conducting them. It was perfect for a sound guy like you and me, because they would make a sound and then they would stop. Then another one would answer and they would stop. They weren't stepping on each other. You couldn't. You can't get actors to do that,
Exactly.
But the buffalo were doing it all on their own. So they recorded these things, and as I said, it was for this National Park Service film, but I sent it off to my friend Ben, who at that time was the sound designer for the 3 prequels. And he heard them and loved them. And it became some creature. I forget which creature. The one that sounds like a buffalo. But that became a creature. So that was part of what I did after I left Lucasfilm. Another time there were these things called cicadas. You know what cicadas are, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So there's the 17-year cicada, which is a different kind of cicada. And as its name, it only comes out once every 17 years. And there was a cycle right at about the time I think Ben was working on the second prequel, episode 2, and its name escapes me. I'm sure everyone's shouting it at the podcast right now, but I can't remember what the name of it is, even though I worked on it. So I recorded these things, and there are thousands and thousands of them. They have this kind of zzz, kind of rising and falling and stuff. And I made recordings all over the Washington, D.C. area where I lived at the time. And a funny story, one of my sons, who was 10 years old at the time, who's fearless, would eat bugs and stuff. I was with him one night, and I said, there was one on a tree outside, and he was making a single sound. That's the thing with cicadas. It's hard to get just one. And I said, boy, I wish I could get just one, but every time I get close to the tree, they fly away. And my little 10-year-old son said, I got this. And he walked over and he plucks it off the tree. And I said, great, bring it in the studio. So he brought it, my studio was right there. So he brought off the sort of the side yard. So we closed the door. I pulled out my noggin. He's holding onto this thing. And it's buzzing, like really mad. And he's holding onto its wings. And that became a creature. I sent that to Ben. In fact, he called me from the editing room, and he was sitting there with George Lucas. George had come in, and George was editing with Ben. And Ben said, I just want to call you. I just got like those cicadas. They're awesome. We're putting them in one of the with jungle scenes, and we're also going to use for creatures. And George in the background said something about, called them chirping quesadillas instead of cicadas. Because he's a California guy, right?
Right.
And he didn't know from the East Coast that we know. I'm literally sitting in Savannah while I'm doing this interview, at 9:00 at night, and I'm listening to the frogs and the crickets and the island animals out here, but the cicadas are just kind of a very specific kind of sound. And that made it into, a couple of Star Wars films as creatures. So that's just 2 examples of that. So that's some of the stuff I did.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Shifting gears to, you also worked on Lincoln, and you were a sound design assistant on that?
I was the assistant sound designer for that. And my job was, I got a call from Ben. again, the connection to Ben Burtt. And he called me and said that Steven had asked him to do Spielberg had asked him to do sound design for this new film called Lincoln. Now, I'd heard about it because I was in Washington at the time, and they had shot a lot of their exteriors down in and around Richmond. Richmond standing in for 1860s Washington, D.C., the buildings down there. So they shot a lot of it in Richmond. And I knew a lot of the same guys who were working on it. I did not do the location sound there, but Ben called and said, and I'm paraphrasing that, I can't remember the exact conversation, but something along the lines of, I've just told Steven that, I want to do something special for the sound design for this film. So I want to get the sounds that Lincoln actually would have heard. And Steven loved the idea. There's a long pause on the phone, and he says, "You're in Washington, so what sounds would Lincoln might have heard?" And so we started brainstorming. What would you guess are some of the things from 1860 that Lincoln would have heard that you can still hear today?
I would think horse-drawn carriages. And
yeah, that's one thing we looked at. I'll tell you about that. What else?
I don't know, troop movement, and you got to have some wood chopping, right? So
yes, wood chopping in there, some troop movement. That's good.
Crowd murmur.
Yeah, that's it.
And just some natural environment, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, and Lincoln was an interesting film because the film is really about the passage of the 13th Amendment. So there's a lot of stuff that deals with Congress. And there's a lot of it. Did you see the film?
I have not seen it.
You got to see it. It's really great. It's all my stuff in it. It's really cool. A lot of it is held in Congress itself. Okay. So all the things that you mentioned, and there's some other things. Now, those are things that I didn't just want carriages like Lincoln, like they might have used back in the day. I wanted something Lincoln rode in. I wanted something he actually heard. So, so I went from that. There were some things we fudged a little bit. Obviously, we did horse and carriage sounds. There are only 2 carriages that survive from that day that we know that Lincoln actually rode in. One of them it's in a museum. I think it's in Indianapolis someplace, and we couldn't take it out. It's literally, velvet roped off, and it's an open carriage, and we know that he rode in that, but I couldn't record that because I couldn't take it outside of the museum. What we did was we went there and recorded the little door on the side opening and closing, because that sounds in the film. The other carriage that we know that he rode in was the one that carried his casket. And that's also in a museum. So I knew a guy, I can't remember his name, but he's a wonderful guy who supplied wagons, Civil War period wagons that he either made or restored, and he lives down on a farm in Virginia. So I went down there for a day, and there's actually some pictures of me recording with that on my website on prosfromdoverproductions.com. And so there's actually some footage of me actually recording some of those carriages and some still photos of that. So we went down there for a day and we recorded that. So that took care of the carriages and the horses. That's how we fudged that. But there were 2 other really interesting things on that film that I wanted to get. 3 things, actually. One was the debate in Congress. Now, they wouldn't let me bring a loop group. In fact, it wasn't a loop group. It was just a collection of people. It wasn't a loop group because they didn't speak. But it was people. I needed people sort of standing up and sitting down or shuffling their feet, or just in general sort of shouting out, Mr. Speaker, something like that. For some reason, they wouldn't let us do it in Congress because I wanted to go on the Hill and do it in the Capitol, but they wouldn't let us do it. So because I actually did ask. I said, you're not always debating there. There's some evening time. And they're like, no, it's the U.S. Congress. You can't do it. So I did the next best thing, which is a place called DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution, Constitution Hall, which is in Washington, D.C. I think it's on 17th Street. It's just literally a stone's throw from the White House. You can hit a rock with it. It's right there. And the interior dimensions in terms of length, width, and the ceiling height is almost identical to the U.S. House of Representatives if you turn it sideways. And they've got a big wooden stage. So what I did was I called over there and I rented the hall for a night. And I pulled in a bunch of students and professors. I was teaching American University in D.C. at the time. So I put out a call, and I got 50 students and professors who all came down to Constitution Hall, and they all followed direction. And we put in various recorders. I had one on stage. I had 2 different recorders out further down away from the stage to record sort of the echo, get the room sound, and then a second recorder on stage as well. So again, going back to the the Sanken CMS7 stereo mic, did that. So we did a lot of that stuff for all that. So anytime people stand up or sit down and that kind of stuff, we then went to got permission to go to the White House. And we actually did go to the White House. We found out there are 4 clocks in the White House that were there when Lincoln was president. And one of them was in his office. And so we actually went in, we got our coats and tie on and showed up and went through the security check. And the Obamas were out of the White House that day. So it's an awesome building, and it's actually an office building. The whole downstairs that you don't see is office, and the first floor that most people see, like the East Room and things like that, where the speeches are given, that's public space. So we were able to record the clocks, although we weren't able to touch the clock. We had an historian with white museum gloves handling it for us, but we were able to record the sound of the clock, and that's in the movie as well. The tick, tick, tick. Tick, 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 tick. That's literally the clock. It was literally in Lincoln's office. They'd hear it every single day. So we recorded that. Plus, we also, after we did that, I like to push the limits. So there are several scenes in the movie where Lincoln's in the office and the guy comes up and, knocks on the door, Mr. President, and throws the 2 doors open and goes charging in, So I went to the East Room. And, Ben got on one side with the recorder and I got on the other, and I pounded on the door of the East Room. And then I had also brought some boots that I looked online and created hobnail boots that were the same as Lincoln wore, the same construction, which basically is a boot with a leather sole and nails sort of all around the end of it. And I took these boots that I created. I basically bought some boots, old army boots at I think it was a surplus store, and then I put some nails in it, and then walked around the White House in them. So the floorboards are there, and then so we did the White House thing, and then across the street was St. John's Episcopal Church, and that's where we got the floorboards there. That church dates back to 1822, 1826, I think it was built, and they put flooring in, I think, around 1836. Lincoln would go there every single day and worship there. So he walked on those floorboards. So I took those hobnail boots and did freeform Foley, walking up and down the floorboards of the church, the actual church. I call it make a friend. I knocked on the door and met the pastor and told him we were working on this Lincoln movie and blah, blah, blah. And he said, great, yeah, sure. And he told me the whole history. The coolest thing about the church was this pew. In the back of the church, Lincoln would come in every day for the 5 o'clock service. He'd walk across from the White House. Back when you could do that. It was like, it's right across from the White. It still is there, but there were no fences around them. There were actually sheep grazing on the lawn, So he would walk over with one, sentry, one bodyguard, and walk over, and actually we go to the War Department first. It's a quick story, but it's a really good story, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Lincoln, and this was a story is told to me by the pastor of St. John's Episcopal Church, which is the church I'm talking about. Every day, Lincoln, during the war, would go down to the War Department, walk across with a single sentry, and walk down into the basement of it, where they had all of these Morse code clackers, all the receivers, and there were dozens of them there, little stations. And he would get there, I think, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon and tell stories, waiting for the reports to come in from the field, from Antietam or Gettysburg or Sharpsburg or, Chickamauga, or wherever the battles were being fought at that point. Wait for the killed, wounded in action, and missing in action, the 3 figures from each field. And at a certain time, sometime around between 3 and 4 o'clock in the field, these troops would send in their reports. So Lincoln would get there at 3 o'clock, and he would tell stories. He would sit around, be surrounded by captains and lieutenants and fresh-faced little privates, and tell them stories. He was a big storyteller, a big joke teller. He didn't tell jokes like Rodney Dangerfield, or jokes. It was not one-liners, but he would tell these stories, and he'd get them all. And then all of a sudden, the first little ticker thing, the report would come in, and the room would fall silent, and everyone would go to their station. And Lincoln would take off his top hat and put it off to the side, and one at a time, these young privates would come up and hand him these pieces of paper which had killed in action, missing in action, and wounded. And he would read them, and no more jokes. It's very somber, and read them and fold it and put it in his hat. And then he'd get another one, and he would read it and fold it and put it in his hat. Didn't talk to anybody. And he would get all the reports in. And the reporting was sort of done around 4:30, 4:45. And he would then rise without even saying goodbye, because he was now seeing in written form the enormity of what had happened. He was the commander in chief. He sent these guys to their death. So he was feeling that. And so he would finish that, and then he would put on his hat and he'd walk up the hill to St. John's Episcopal and arrive for the 5 o'clock service, always 5 minutes late. Always 5 minutes late, because he didn't want to get there early, because people would want to talk to him or glad hand him or smile at him. And he was still feeling the weight of what he had just read. So by design, he would come in the back of the church and sit in the last pew on the right-hand side. And that pew is still there. It's called the Lincoln Pew. So when I was there walking the floorboards, I noticed the Lincoln Pew. And there was a velvet rope across it. He goes, "Oh, yeah." He goes, "Nobody sits there." There's a little brass plaque. He said, "That was Abraham Lincoln's pew. And since he died, they put a velvet rope up, and no one is, we go in and we dust it once in a while, but no one's ever sat in it." And I said, "I know this is sacrilege, but I want to sit in the pew." And I said, "Because I bet it's old wood." He said, "Yeah, it's never been replaced." So it had a cushion on. I took the cushion off. I got permission. I sat on the pew, and I moved my butt around so that it would creak. You get that wooden creak. And as it turns out, we use that in the film. I say we, Ben did the post on this, but I sent it to him. And they use that in the film. Every time Daniel Day-Lewis, as Lincoln, shifts in his chair, that's me in the Lincoln pew shifting, using that actual pew. I mean, that was the level of detail we went to. And then, of course, a lot of there was no CNN and there was no Twitter. So the word from the hill that the thing had passed was signaled by church bells. It's a very pivotal scene in the movie. You'll see it when you go see it. And the church bells, I wanted church bells that Lincoln actually would have heard. So one of them, I crawled up in the belfry, and I was told I was the first person to crawl up there since they built the belfry in St. John's Church, the one that had the pew. And I crawled up there and sat next to the bell, and with a ball-peen hammer hit it and recorded the bell. And then we went to 3 other churches around Washington where I could document that the bell was actually there in 1864 when the 13th Amendment passed. So that I recorded 4 different bells from churches that rang their bells to signal the passage of the 14th Amendment. So those are the actual. So when he hears it and he opens the window in the film, I'm ruining the wonderful scene at the end of it where he hears it and then he goes and opens the window and it's all the church bells. And those are the ones we recorded, and those are real church bells that Lincoln would have heard. But that's not even the best part of it. I'm babbling on, but I'm building to a great story. If you stop me anytime.
No, keep going.
This is the best part of it, which is that there was his watch. And now there are 2 scenes in the movie where we see him checking his watch. One scene in particular where he's sitting and he's waiting for results from Capitol Hill. The 13th Amendment, for those of your listeners that don't know what it is, it was deciding the issue of slavery for all time. And it was a highly contentious thing. He had written the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves, but he knew it wouldn't work. It wouldn't be law unless he changed the Constitution through an amendment, and this was the 13th Amendment. So this is in doubt. So one key part of the film, very historic, recreations all throughout the film. Wonderful film. Daniel Day-Lewis as Lincoln is sitting at this roll-top desk, and there's a pocket watch. His pocket watch is hanging off by a chain, and he's hitting it like a pendulum. And it's tick, 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 tick. And so, I had seen the rough cut and saw that there was that. Plus there are 2 other scenes, I think, where he actually pulls the watch from his pocket and checks it. So we knew we had to get the watch. Now there were 4 watches. Actually, there were only 2 that I knew of. There were 2 watches that we knew that Lincoln owned, and they were both in the Smithsonian. So make a long story, this part of the story short, I called the Smithsonian, and we tried in vain to get those 2 watches, but they wouldn't release them. One was broken. Even though we said we'll have it fixed, we couldn't close the deal on that. So we kept researching, and Ben called me one day and said, I found 2 other watches that we know. One of them is in Chicago, and the provenance is not very good. And that's museum speak, meaning they couldn't prove it, but it was pretty good. He said, but the 4th watch, this is the watch that Robert Todd Lincoln took from his father's pocket as he lay dying on the bed with his stuff. This is the watch that he had every day with him. So this is like The Watch. And Robert Todd Lincoln, his son, had it, and it was passed down through the Todd family all the way until sometime in the 60s or 70s when it was given to the Kentucky Historical Society. So we tried very much with the wonderful people at the Smithsonian, but we couldn't get the watch to record that. So we found this other watch, Kentucky Historical Society. I called them. Do you have the watch? And this guy, what was his name? Doug something. Wonderful guy. Said, yeah, we've got the watch. I said, does it work? Because the ones at Smithsonian's don't work. He goes, yeah, it works. And I said, can I come down and record it? He goes, when do you want to be here? And like, whoop, I was there like the next day. I literally got on a plane and flew down there. We recorded in what they call their gun safe, which is this big room where they have historic guns. They've got, the rifles from the McCoy Hatfield's feud and, General Eisenhower's sidearm and one of General Patton's pistols, I think. I may be getting some of that wrong. But it was the only quiet room in the museum. And I went down there and I built a box. And we got the watch, and I brought my white museum gloves, and I recorded, I think, 15 different versions of the tick. There's an example of it on my website that you can actually go and you can listen to the raw track itself. And if you listen really carefully, because you can hear sort of a tick, 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 which is a two-tone thing. Tick, 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 tick. But there's also, if you listen really closely, put headphones on when you hear it, and you can hear kind of a ting, 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 really high, really faint. You have to really listen for a while. I think I put a good long 2 minutes of it on the website there. Spielberg loved it so much that he actually when he did an interview for 60 Minutes, he mentioned it. He said, yeah, our sound guys actually found the watch and stuff. And during that scene, there was supposed to be music underneath the scene where Lewis is listening to the watch. And Spielberg said, no music there, just the watch. Because it's that wonderful solitude. Watch the movie and watch that scene and you'll see what I mean. And it was because we got lucky. And, perseverance, you make your own luck, I guess. But Ben kept looking after I was struggling with the Smithsonian and found the real watch. And then I flew down and I recorded it. So, perseverance pays off.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, people don't realize the time and effort and, trying to make things authentic when it comes to sound design and recording sound effects. And do you have a philosophy when it comes to doing that?
It's funny. I think that if you can do it, if it's going to slow things down, who's going to notice that was Lincoln's real watch? In fact, I did test recordings that I sent to Ben with my grandfather's watch, who gave me his gold pocket watch. And I did some test recordings in this box that I built before I took it down to, I think they're in Frankfort, Kentucky, down in Kentucky to record Lincoln's watch. So I did some test recordings of my own watch. If I had put my grandfather's watch in the film, I'm telling you I did this, and you have my word. But what I'm saying is you'd never know the difference, right?
Yeah.
But I think if you can, yeah, sure, why not? I mean, the challenge that Ben challenged me to go out and find sounds that Lincoln actually would have heard. It was something that Spielberg was willing to give us the space and the time to do it, because there are, and you must know this from your own work, some directors will give you lots of latitude on sounds, but for all my brothers and sisters working out there in location sound, unfortunately those directors are kind of few and far between. I can probably name them on one hand. The Coen brothers really care about sound. Tarantino really cares about sound. Spielberg does, of course Lucas does. But, Hitchcock sort of did. But a lot of directors just like, shoot it, we'll fix it in the mix, But we're talking about two different things also. We're talking here, you and I, about location sound and also field sound effects recording. And there's, very much a distinction between the two, or is there? And the point that I make, my philosophy to come around in a circle to your question, is that when I'm doing location sound, I make sure that I pay attention to the things that are on the set that make a sound that I might not be able to get later on. And so in addition to my primary duty, I always tell my students this, and anybody who's coming up in the business, job number one is get good, clean, usable dialogue. That's job number one. Get that. You have to do that. Now, you also have free time. And I'm a geeky nerd, and I imagine some of the guys who listen, guys and gals who listen to your program here, they're geeky like we are. At the end of a broad, I always am there an hour before anybody on the set, so I can get the sunrise. I can get that transition from night to day, from crickets to birds, I call it. And then as everyone wraps around 5 or 6 or 7 p.m., I'll stay to get the night sounds, or I'll go find an owl in the forest, or, during a lunch break, everyone goes off to the tent to have lunch. I'll grab the stunt guy and have him ride the horse again for wild sound. My theory is that if you're hired to do field sound effects recording, that's just, a matter of a checklist, and you go down and get what you can. But if it's location sound, create a library. I remember one of the things that I heard very early on in my career is that it was an IMAX film I was working on, and the post-production guy was, and to this day, is a guy named Peter Tilley. And he's up in IMAX up in Canada, and he is an amazing post-production mixer. And I remember very early on, the first IMAX film I worked on, I sent them not only the stuff that was guide track for the camera, but I also sent him a library of some other sounds. I got some birds, and I got some this, and I got some cars and stuff like that. And he actually called me on the set and said, no one has ever done this in the history, which isn't true, because there are some location signs. He said, it's the first time I've ever gotten it. And that started a 30-year friendship and a 30-year professional relationship with IMAX for me. I don't know of anybody who was doing like regular sound for IMAX before I did it. And that was just because I fell in. What happened was the IMAX directors came to Lucasfilm because they said, I remember the first one I did, a guy named Keith Merrill, a great IMAX director, said, we got big picture, we need big sound. And Lucasfilm's all about big sound. I got to know him, and he took me on location, which led to another, which led to another, which led to my work for the space division and recording astronauts and then eventually training and stuff like that. But it's all just, the takeaway here is if you're doing location sound, always pay attention to job one, but build yourself a library and give that library over to the post-production people. You will save them so much time. They will remember you. And when it's time to find somebody else, they're going to say, find me Michael Helms, because he's the guy who gives me more than I asked for. It saves them money. It saves them time, because it's a pain in the butt to record some of these things, afterwards.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I want to talk about IMAX in a second, but I have one more question regarding you worked on some Indiana Jones and did some sound recording. Tell us a little bit about that.
I did like foreigns I got there during, what was the second one? Temple of Doom. I got there after Raiders. Raiders of the Lost Ark was the movie that got me into filmmaking. I was working at NPR at the time. The movie came out. I went to see it. I was literally blown away in the theater. I went to the 10 a.m. screening on the day it was released because I had heard great things about it in advance. And the sound, I was sitting in the theater. I'd worked at NPR for 5 years at that point. And it was a great job. I loved my work at NPR as a producer and an editor and a reporter. And I listened to that movie in the darkness of that theater at the 10 a.m. screening and nobody else in the theater. And I said literally out loud to nobody in the room, I'm in the wrong job. I need to be in filmmaking. This is what I want to do. So that was the film that inspired me. Funny story, fast forward, 2 years later, I was working at Lucasfilm. I was sitting in Ben Burtt's office as a lowly droid, and I said, Ben, you did the sound design for Raiders. I said, that's the movie that got me involved. He said, what specifically? And I said, well, there's that bar fight in Nepal. You know the film, right?
Right.
When he goes in and when he sees Marion for the first time and the Germans come in, we are not thirsty, right? That whole thing. And then, they get in the big fight and there's the guns and the guns are going off. The ricochets are, they're coming from the surrounds and all over. And I'm telling this story to Ben and I stop and I say, I'm telling you about your own sound. He laughs. He goes, well, what you mean is gunshots number 16. And he turns around on a shelf behind him and pulls down a 1/4-inch tape and racks it up on his Otari there and hits play. And I said, that's it. He said, that's the gunshot. And we put that for the 38 caliber pistol that Indy uses, and it's actually a 30-06 rifle that we recorded up in the hills of Marin, north of San Rafael, where Lucas had some land. And they eventually built the ranch. We all moved to the ranch after a while. But I came after Raiders, but it was Raiders that got me started. I came in to do foreigns on the middle one on Temple of Doom. But the first work I really did was on The Last Crusade. And The Last Crusade, I mentioned earlier, I talked about with you about Fort Grayling, where I went up and did artillery. And they had Civil War cannons and stuff. And that's where he found out that analog was as good as digital. It was for that movie. I forgot now that I'm telling the story. It was for specifically set me up there for that movie. So the artillery, there's a tank scene when a tank is chasing Indiana Jones and Sean Connery as his dad is trapped inside and he's trying to get his dad out, and the tank is shooting shells at Indy who's riding away on a horse. Those are the explosions and tank sounds are those cannons from Fort Grayling. So I did all of those sounds. I think I did some horse sounds for that. I did some old trucks for that. I did a lot of field sound for that stuff because I had left. Was I still at Lucasfilm? I think I had left Lucasfilm. I just started at NPR, but as I said, you never leave a job. So I ended up doing a lot of stuff for that. And then what was the last one? There was Last Crusade, which wasn't, and then there was one after that. The fourth one, I did some stuff for that as well. Again, they called me and said, "Could you get us some X, Y, and Z?" They give me a list, and I'd sort of go out and find some stuff. Or anytime you're out there, I mean, if you're a true sound geek, sound is really. You and I, Michael, we hear the word and all of your listeners, we hear the world differently. And we're just going to forgive everybody else who doesn't hear it the way we hear it, right? But what a wonderful way, if you go through. Now, I've been yakking so much and talking, but I always say, you can learn more from your ears than your mouth. But we hear the world in a different way, and I'm always fascinated by really interesting sounds. So if I'm somewhere and I hear something really cool, I'll record it and then I'll send it in. And that is a lot of the stuff that I do with Lucasfilm. I'll hear something and I'll send it in. The cicadas I talked about, things that even if they don't ask for it, just send it in. And through various other connections and stuff up to Peter Tilley that I've sent to him over the years and in the IMAX post world and stuff like that. So that was sort of my Indiana Jones experience.
Oh, that's great. Now, a lot of times too is, here you are, you're working for a film that, an iconic film that comes out, and some of them you're on set and some of them you're never on set.
That's right.
You just send it in.
Well, yeah, you really do. You really do. And a lot of the stuff that I did it backwards, and it was interesting to hear you read the intro and introduce yourself at the top of the podcast. If I got it right, you started in post and then went on location, right?
Yes. Yeah. I started off, I was in record. I did the whole Full Sail University experience. And
no kidding. Love Full Sail.
Yeah. After college, I went to college, got a degree in advertising, but I had a radio and television class and I wanted more of that. And so I did. I did their audio program and then ended up moving to New York City and did the music scene for a while and then got more into the production side. And I loved it. I loved doing that. We did Foley and sound effects all the time in the studio, and we did a lot of promo work. And so, you do a promo for the Sci-Fi Channel for the, Terminator, this weekend, and that kind of, so we had the voiceover and then we would rebuild the whole commercial because we couldn't use all those sound effects and music that were already cut, and we would create our own little promo. So it was a lot of fun. So I had a good time.
Well, see, it's funny. I often, because I did the same thing. I started in post and then I went on the set. And I always tell my location sound students, I say I kind of did it backwards. Because usually you start on the set and it's 18-hour days and bad food and rotten weather and crappy hotel rooms. And then you finally say, okay, if I'm going to have that schedule, I at least want to sleep in my own bed every night. So then you shift over to post, A lot of people do it that way, but you and I kind of did it backwards. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. And I've jumped back and forth since then between the two fields. I still do stuff in the field, but, I still work in the studio. I was in the studio today working, as a matter of fact. So
that's great, though. Well, let's do shift gears and talk a little bit about the IMAX experience, IMAX cameras. Our mutual friend, John Scottam, worked with you on a number of IMAX films over the years, and he always talked about how noisy the IMAX camera was. Can you tell us a little bit about the challenges of recording sound with that camera?
Oh, God, yes. Yeah, John and I are also very old friends, and we've slogged around the globe together, and he's a wonderful, wonderful guy. I love John. And the IMAX camera, the original IMAX camera came out of the 1960s, and there were three Toronto inventors, engineers who basically invented this thing. And the concept, for those who don't know it, IMAX basically throws a really big picture. The screen is typically 90 feet by 60 feet, so it's huge. You see these in museums almost exclusively. IMAX today is not really IMAX that was IMAX, and I'll explain the difference in a minute. But just the camera itself, the one we used a lot, the one they refined was the fifth version, so it was called the IW5, which is I think stood for IMAX Works 5, version 5. And it was the thing about the IMAX camera is a regular film camera, 16 or 35 millimeter, or even a 65, 70 millimeter camera, Panavision camera, takes the film and runs it sort of vertically through a lens, there's a feed reel and a take-up reel. What the IMAX engineers did, and the size of that frame is 16 by 9. So that's your basic widescreen frame, and it's 4 sprockets. It's called 4 perf for perforation. And so if you hold up a piece of 70 millimeter film, you'll see each frame is 4 perforations wide. For those of your listeners who have ever shot a 35 millimeter film, that's also 4 perf, same thing. It's just 70 millimeter. It's just, instead of 35 millimeter wide, it's twice as wide. It's 70 millimeter wide. It's okay. So IMAX, what they did was they turned the camera on its side, literally on its side. So instead of feeding from top to bottom, it feeds horizontally from the feed to the take-up reel. That meant they could make their negative bigger, and their negative was now, instead of 4 perf, it was 15 perf. So it's a much bigger negative, which means if you shine a light through that negative, just as a still picture, you can project on a much bigger screen. The easy way to explain that is that if you took a 35, or if you took that 70 millimeter 4 perf frame that I was talking about, and you shined a light through it and you showed a film on a 90-foot wide, 60-foot high screen, it would look really grainy, all terribly grainy. But if you make the negative bigger, 15 perforations, it's bigger, it's 2 by 3 inches, you can project on a much bigger screen. That's the secret of IMAX. There it is. The sound for IMAX was very interesting, and I'm coming to answer your question, but it's sort of a side door little lecture on this thing real quick, so you'll understand. The IMAX sound system is different than theaters. When you go and see in a theater, as you and I both know, it's usually 2 stereo speakers behind the screen and then a bunch of speakers behind you, which are really just one single mono channel, and then there's usually a subwoofer below the screen. It just depends on and theaters have gotten a lot better and they've upped their game. But that's the basic setup in your multiplex when you go out and see a movie. When you see an IMAX movie, you're hearing actually 6 discrete channels. You're hearing left, center, right, which is, in IMAX theaters, you can look online, or if you've never been to one, and see how the layout is very different. They used to have a slogan, "We put you in the picture," and it's because the screen is so big and it's a really vaulted, kind of really steep kind of audience thing. So there's a left, center, right in front of you. That's channels 1, 2, 3. Channel 4 is top center, which is all the way at the top, a single channel at the top of the screen, and then left surround and right surround, discrete channels. So that's 6 discrete channels. And what that means is, it's such a big picture that things are moving around the frame. So you can pan things. A good example of that is a shuttle launch. And I've recorded dozens and dozens of shuttle launches down at the Cape. And I would record them with multiple recorders. But what you get when you watch a shuttle launch on an IMAX screen, go watch a Blue Planet. It's one of the oldest IMAX films and still stands up. And that's a film that I worked on with Ben and some others. And John worked on that as well. John Scottham and James Nyhouse and David Douglas were the cinematographers, I think. But you hear the shuttle sort of blast off in the center channel, and then it spreads out to left, right. And as it rises, you hear it coming out of the top center speaker. And then you're able to, in the mix, isolate in left surround and right surround Capcom, what's called capsule control. It's mission control. You go on Discovery, and things like that. So you can isolate that, and then the astronaut, have the Capcom, Discovery, go with throttle up, and then the astronaut chants like, go Roger, go with throttle up. So you can isolate that in left surround and right surround, so you're having the conversation behind you in the theater, yet you're hearing the pure rumble, beautiful sound of that shuttle rumble in left, center, right, and top center. Now those, and I'm getting around to the camera, those films were mixed, like Blue Planet, a lot of those IMAX films were mixed at Lucasfilm, the ones that I worked on, and we actually put 4 speakers behind the screen. So my job as a location sound person for an IMAX film was to go out and record having in mind that there were 6 different destinations for my sound. Some of it was straight up stereo, so I knew it was going to be left stereo. But there was also, certain things are going to be top center, certain things are going to be regular center, certain things that would end up either stereo surround or mono surround. So during a mission, I would have 9 different recorders around the shuttle launch site, rolling simultaneously. And every one of them found a home. And none of them were close to the camera. And this is the answer to your question. The IW5 is a notoriously loud. Because of that 15 perf thing, it has to pull more film through quickly. A typical 1,000-foot reel of film in a typical Panavision camera lasts for about 10 minutes. Typically, 1,000 feet lasts about 10 minutes, about 100 feet per minute, if I'm not mistaken about that. IMAX, 1,000 feet lasts only 3 minutes. So you've got to get your shot, and you only got 3 minutes to do it. So the camera's really loud. So, for instance, you can't do dialogue on IMAX because the camera really loud. They tried over the years building blimps. They built a lead blimp. It took 4 of us to carry it onto the set, a special 4-leg tripod that could have held a car. And this was this lead case. We put the camera in, and they were so proud of it. We were on location for a film called Polynesian Odyssey, way out, because the tribal elders were going to tell us about, they came over from various islands and, telling stories of their ancestors and amazing stories that they told, but they wanted to film it. And we got into this little hut, and it looked beautiful, and they rolled the camera, and it was loud as hell. Just like, and I turned to the director, and we did one of them, and then I turned to the director after, the first guy told his stories, and I said, this isn't going to work. I said, we tried Barneys. Barneys, for your listeners, a Barney is just any kind of thing that covers a camera. So they make them sometimes out of, felt or cloth or different materials. And we tried, putting packing blankets over it. But the problem was that you had to have a hole in the front of it for the lens, and that's where the sound would leak out. And they're incredibly loud. So what I would do was I would try, whenever filming with the IMAX camera, to try to put something between the camera and myself. So we solved the problem of recording the elders in that film by I put my microphones on the back side of the building. They were in the front of the building, and then I got behind the actors and mic'd them from that direction, a highly directional microphone and a lavalier microphone that I actually had to sew into because for the camera, they wore tribal dress, which was made out of like straw and palm fronds. So I always carry a sewing kit. This is a tip for all you location sound people out there. Always carry those little sewing kits you get in hotel rooms. Always carry them in your kit. I've always got at least 2 or 3 of them. It's because you're always sewing a little microphone. That's the other thing that's a standard in my kit are the what are they? The Electrosonics. Those really tiny ones. The L6, I think it is. They're just awesome, tiny, tiny microphones, and I've sewn them into costumes and stuff. So I sewed something into like the palm fronds. The only problem was he had to sit really still because whenever he moved, it was like palm trees in the wind, like this rustle, rustle, rustle kind of sound. So he's like he was 180 years old or something outside. I went up to him and I was always very. This is one of the great things about the job. You meet such interesting, wonderful people. And he couldn't have been nicer. We didn't speak a word of each other's language, but he understood exactly what I needed. And just through pantomime, I was like, don't move around, microphone. And then I put the headphones on him. The first time he'd ever wore headphones. And he was like looking around the room because he heard his voice. And it's, talk about a moment, for a guy. And I'd say, I was kidding, 180s, but he was probably in his 80s or 90s. And, just had sort of grown up in the jungle, was one of these village elders, never worn headphones before. But as soon as I put the headphones on and then I rustled his little headpiece, he was like, and he nodded, oh, I get it. You don't want me to move around. It's like, yeah, that's it. But we solved it by a really close lavalier microphone, but it was always a challenge. So I would try to put like a building between me. If it was something for a launch or something, I would get away from the camera, just try to put some distance. It's the only thing. They still haven't solved that problem. No, now what they do is they shoot IMAX, with different cameras, and they're quieter. And some of them we can now shoot digital and projected IMAX. So you don't need the old IMAX film cameras. I don't even know if there must be some diehards out there. And my old friend David Douglas is probably out there still shooting on IMAX film cameras, and God bless him for it. And David, if you're out there, I'd do location sound with you anytime because we travel the world together. But most people are now, we've solved that problem digitally in video. And so we get much higher resolution, which means you can throw a bigger picture. So the whole debate over the negative is moved.
Wow. You also sent IMAX cameras to the International Space Station, and you actually trained some astronauts on how to use it, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, yeah. There was a specially built camera that we flew, and I can't remember the model number, but it's basically the IW5 but boiled down to a much smaller version. I say smaller version. Look on the web and type up, NASA International Space Station IMAX camera, and you'll see that's still a big. We call it the pig. It's still a big pig. But the challenge for me as a sound person, there was a guy named James Nyhouse who has been the IMAX trainer forever, and the original IMAX trainer for sound was Ben Burt, my old friend. We keep crossing paths, and at some point he got busy with one of the Star Wars movie and called me and said, IMAX, and could you do a training session? I can't make it. And so I did it, and that was 35 years ago. So I've been training them for 30, 35 years. He trained them for like 3, and I trained them for the next 35 or something like that. What I did was I trained the crews, and still do this whenever there's an IMAX film, is I'll fly down to Houston, because that's where all the astronauts train. They blast off from Cape Canaveral in Florida, but all the training facilities are at Johnson Space Center in Houston. So they have one building called Building 9, and Building 9 is this monstrous building that has a complete mock-up of the International Space Station in it, two complete mock-ups of space shuttles in there. And we use that during our training. And now they've, of course, grounded the space shuttles. Yet I still will go there and train them for use, how to record sound on the ISS, on the International Space Station. And we use specific microphones that we've modified to record up there. They're 2 omnidirectional microphones. And I walk around with the astronauts inside the mock-up of the International Space Station, which is, every detail down to the last little light and switch is the same. The only thing that's different is the gravity, as we say. Because there, up is down and down is up. You can be literally working next to somebody and they're upside down, and it doesn't matter. Because, gravity doesn't care. And sound doesn't care either. So when we first did the training sessions, I was listening to the tapes that were coming back. And originally we flew something called a Sony D5M, which was a stereo cassette recorder. Then went to a Sony Pro Walkman, then went to the HHB, which was DAT, and then went to a Fostex FR2LE, which is CF card based, and that was the last one that flew when they grounded the shuttles. But the microphones remained the same throughout, except that we did add one Audio-Technica, I think it's called a Pro 24. It's an ENG mic, one you clip on the top of the camera. It's a single point stereo mic. And we started to use that as well up there because that was part of the camera kit. So we were able to borrow that microphone while we were up there. And so I would go to Houston and train the crews and say, okay, well, for this shot, let's put the microphones here and here. And then for this shot, and a lot of the shots in the space station, if you've ever seen these IMAX films, they float from like one place to another, and someone's doing something and some guy floats into the frame, or, one of the or some, one of the women astronauts sort of come up from underneath, because up is down and down is up. So I would say, okay, great. So let's put a microphone here where this guy's doing his work. And when this guy comes in, let's put the microphone here because he shouts out something to this guy over here and blah, blah, blah. So we would talk about mic placement. And then I would tell them the same thing that I mentioned a little while ago in our conversation about what's job one. Job one is getting good, clean, usable dialogue. But always, always, always get anything else. So I would always, at the end of the basic training with the astronauts about the shot, I'd have the shot list and we'd go through it. And for this scene, the microphones go here. And for this scene, the microphones go here. And then at the very end, I would say, okay, I want you to do 2 other things. If there's a sound up there that you find interesting, like the space toilet, there's a toilet that, which really sounds like a hairdryer. It's kind of like, I said, any motors, any clicks, any interesting sounds up there, record it. Just go wild for Wild Track. And send that down because they now can make them into audio files, and we can download them from space, directly from space. We used to have to wait till the thing landed, and then we would take the bags and the DAT tapes and then cross our fingers that we got something. But so I would say, record lots of wild sound, and I would explain what wild sound is. And I said the other thing is record an audio diary. Just tell us as you look out the window what you're feeling. Because that's the kind of stuff that in an IMAX space film occupies a lot of the surround speakers. Just people talking about, there's a beautiful thing that Charlie Bolden, think it was Charlie, who was on STS 31, Shuttle Transportation System. The nickname for all the shuttles is STS, and then the mission number. So STS 31, one of the early ones. And Charlie Bolden, who later went on to become a NASA administrator, but just a great guy, great pilot. And Charlie did like an audio diary when he was up there, and I think it's in one of the films where he talks about the thin blue line. He said, you're up there and you can see this thin blue line right above the atmosphere, and that's all that's protecting us from space. This is why we see from space, we look at Earth, and it's so fragile. And that little just sort of knockoff thing that he did in an audio diary became one of the most important lines in the film. So that's always part of my training. Just give me stream of consciousness. Talk about the experience of, I do it myself, but for some reason they won't send me up there.
Wouldn't that be nice, right?
Yeah, you and I are earthbound here, Michael. But these guys and gals that go up there and do this there, they're just amazing people. Friendly and wonderful and so smart and just wonderfully deep. And so let's get that on tape and let's get that in the movie.
Now, recording sound in space or on the International Space Station, does sound behave differently? That's
a good question. A little bit, and not in the way that we expected. When we listened to the first tapes that came back, we were shocked because I was at Lucasfilm at the time. In fact, I was doing Foley at the time. One of the best jobs I ever had was doing Foley at Lucasfilm. I did that for 2 of my years there, and did Foley for a bunch of films, and also for a bunch of the space films. And we got the tapes back from one of the flights, and we realized that the inside of the space shuttle, this is where he first discovered it, on the space shuttle, and later on the International Space Station, it's all fans and motors. It's like, we have computers now which don't have fans in them, but the old CRT, monitors had those fans in the back of the hard drives, the ones on the floor. You wouldn't hear it after a while, Of course, as a sound guy, you and I, we hear it all the time. That's what I'm talking about. We hear the world differently. And so we got the tapes back. And these were tapes at this time. This was, analog cassette tapes off the Sony D5M. And that was all fans and motors. And so it was hard to hear people. And we tried filtering it. We tried notching it out and, screwing around with it in post-production. We couldn't really fix it. So I started to rethink. When I started to do the training, I started to rethink and the certification of the gear, because they would come to me. They also came to me, over that 35-year relationship, and still do, come to me and say, okay, what's our next generation? Should we be going, we're cassette tape? Should we do it? Yes. So we're all going to, CF cards now. Okay, great. Now we're all going to this and blah, blah. So that was part of my job as well. But it was also to kind of solve this puzzle and fix this problem. And it's kind of an unsolvable problem. Other than proximity, I would have them do what I do, which is the most important part of your sound kit you've had since birth. It's your ears, and trust them. So the first thing I do when I'm on any set, film or TV, or even if I'm doing wild sound effects, is just listen. What am I hearing? And so how do I get away from the noise? I often talk about how your job is not really to record things. It's how not to record something else. It's how to eliminate everything but the sound that you want. That's the challenge. You get this on dialogue on a set, because those of us who have been on film or TV sets, we know that there's always things happening. There's a catering truck 50 yards away, beep, 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 And as I often say, microphones are dumb. We have something in our makeup. We have something called selective audio perception. And it's an old term that I made up. And I made it up because I couldn't find any nomenclature on it, any articles on it. But it's basically explained like this. Selective audio perception means we selectively perceive the sounds that we hear. And that means that, while I've been sitting here talking to you the entire time with my window open, there have been cicadas and frogs out there, and yet I'm not listening to them. I'm listening to you. When you are on a set, a microphone is on an actor, and the two of them are having a conversation. And we know as people that we have selective audio perception. As we're in a restaurant, here's the easiest explanation. You and I are in a restaurant, we're having lunch, and we're talking to each other. Now, there are people all around us talking, and the kitchen is clanking plates, and there's cars outside, a siren goes off slowly. We don't hear that. None of us hear that. Now, it's there, But the little voice inside our head says, don't pay attention to that. Pay attention to Michael, who's sitting across from you because you're having lunch with him, and he's telling you about his day. And then I'm going to, tell him about my day. And, so we listen to each other. These sounds still exist the entire time, but the most important sound in the room is Michael sitting across from me having lunch. The problem with microphones are they don't have selective audio perception. Microphones are dumb. Microphones hear everything. So when we're on a set and we have, these wonderful lav mics buried in the costume of the actors, but we will hear that catering truck 50 yards away backing up. We'll hear that plane overhead in a Civil War film. There were no jet planes back then, so we're holding for a plane. It's the 3 words you never want to hear on set, right? Waiting for sound. But there are times that we have to say to the first AD, and I always try to say yes. I try never to say no. Now I know that sounds contradictory. What I always say is, well, if we roll now, I will hear that plane or I'll hear that dog. Now, I'm happy to roll, but I always give them choices. Always try to give your director choices because they're up against things that are different than you're up against. All you really care about and all you really should care about is your sound. But the director cares about the light, cares about I can only have this actor at the end of the day because he's going to go into platinum time if I have him tomorrow, and it's double and triple time, and so he's fighting different things. He's fighting budgets and stuff like that. So you hear those dreaded words, "We'll fix it in the mix," and I always the hair on the back of all of our necks, all of the people listening to your podcast, we've all been through it. But I will also say this in defense of directors because I've actually been a director at times and produced things as well, is that, realize that they're up against different things. So the best thing you can do is give them choices and just say, hey guys, this dog is gonna, I'm gonna hear that dog, the dog barked in the middle of that wonderful love scene between the two. I love you, Schmoopy. No, I love you. No, I love you. And the music swells and there's a dog in the background and I can't take it off. And I'll tell you a very funny story about that with the director. And so I'm on a set and it was for, can't remember the film. It was back when I was at Lucasfilm and we were shooting in the town of San Rafael where they shot American Graffiti. And it was a film, if I talk about it, it'll come to me. It doesn't matter. There was a scene in an alleyway and there was a guy in a car. And we were shooting at night. And it was a night shoots are just brutal. You've been on night shoots, right? It's just like, it's the worst. It's great because it pays like double day rate, right? Okay. But it's just, you get up, you go to work at 10 p.m. and no amount of coffee is going to, lift you up, and you work till like the sun comes out till 6 or 8, and then you drag your butt home to bed and you crawl in and get, 3 quality hours before somebody bothers you. And you got to go back on set. So we're shooting at night. So I'm already working against, the odds because it's a night shoot. And the scene is simple. The guy in the car is sitting there. A guy walks up from off camera, hands him a bag, and then hears an imaginary sign, says, "Oh, the cops," and he runs off, and then the car drives off, and that's the scene. Okay. So the actor that night, and I've got lav mics on both actors, and I couldn't get close enough for a boom because it was a wide shot for this wide shot for the opening shot. So I had, another 2 microphones inside the car itself. So I had 4 different mics. And it's a master shot, so you see the entire thing. You see the car and stuff like that, and you see the actor walking in from off frame. So he walks up and he does the first take, and he does the second take, and does the third and fourth and fifth take, and the actor keeps blowing his line. All he has to say is, "Here's the bag." The first time he goes, "I have the bag." "No, cut, wrong. It's not the line." It was like a simple line. I think that was the line. And the actor, for whatever reason, every actor goes through this, and they couldn't get the line. I felt for him. Everybody felt for him. The director was getting really frustrated. And so, it was something like crazy, like 20 takes. And so for the 20th take, he walks up, and just as he's walking up, way in the distance, this dog's barking. And if you've ever been up at 2 or 3 in the morning in your neighborhood and you don't know where the dog is, it's not sound specific. It's just echoing off the buildings of the trees. And we were shooting in an alley in a small town. So it was blocks away and echoing off, but it was there, even though it was in the background. And so the dog starts barking just as the actor walks up. And I looked over at the first AD and I pointed to my headphones. And I shrugged my shoulders, which meant I can hear it. That sucks for all of us, And so the actor goes up, of course, here's the bag, delivers the perfect line, reacts perfectly. The car drives off, and the director goes, "Finally, cut, print it," and the first AD says, No, we got to go again. Why? We got to go. The director's apoplectic, he's losing his mind, because he's had to go through 20 takes. And the first AD says, Greg heard a dog. And the director said, and hand to God, these were his words. And this is good that I didn't remember the film because I'd be outing the director at this point. He said, well, he said, we can get rid of that. We can fix it in the mix. And I said, not really. He goes, yeah. We can run it through a dog filter. He said the words dog filter. And and I tell this story sometimes to my students, and I say, I'm here to tell you there's no such thing as a dog filter. We can cut around it. We can sometimes, you are a post guy as well. Sometimes we'll put music underneath to kind of maybe de-emphasize the dog, but you can't pull a dog out of a dialogue track. It just doesn't happen. But he said, we'll just run it through a dog filter. So the takeaway from this is that all you can really do when you're on set is give the information and then back off. Your job is to record good dialogue. And what I do, and this is another tip, if you don't mind me giving another tip for those location sound people out there, always, always, always keep copious notes of everything you record and record in your notes. I always bring pen and paper. People say, well, I can do it on my phone. Yeah, phone batteries die. I always write it down. I still write it in pen and paper. Write down, of course, the sound roll or the disc or whatever. Write the corresponding camera roll so that they can marry it up. Write down the lens that they use so they can quickly scroll through it so they know if it's a 40 millimeter shot, it's going to look different than a 110. It's going to look different than a 250. Get to know your lenses. I know you're sound people, but get to know your lenses. It's really easy. And that way, but put that information down. Become best friends with the AC, with the assistant camera person. Write down everything and then write notes after each take, which is, good or best, keep it simple, and make this good, best, or better, or whatever, subjective, and make it your call, not what the director thinks is the best take, but what you think is the best sound take. They may print a different scene because they like the expression on the actor's face, but if it's the same scene 4 times, maybe they can take the audio, which is great audio in take 4, but they're going to take 1 because they like the reaction. But you're making notes to say, hey, yeah, but he delivered the line best and didn't overmodulate or whatever. So make that or put an NG for no good. But also, if I get overruled by a director on a set, because they have to sometimes, because picture rules on a set, we know that. Just write down, dog in BG, dog in background, comma, informed director. And this came back at one point to me years later. It was on an IMAX film. And there was a scene where I was overruled by a director. There was a sound of a catering truck backing up. And there was a BPP. It was way in the distance. And I told the director was there. He goes, oh, no. We'll fix them. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I was like, okay, no problem. And I wrote down an informed director, as in I informed the director, the truck in background, backup sound, informed director. Just put that right with that take, the last take. Months later, I got a call from a post-production guy who knew me very well and said, I got to tell you a story. He said, I was just sitting here and we were in a scene and there was, I put up the guide track for the scene and there was this truck backing up sound. And the director cursed a blue streak. I can't use the words on this podcast that he's, that G.D. Greg Smith, he screwed up my film. He called me out by name to the post-production. Why didn't he tell me it was there? And the post-production guy who was there said, well, he did. Here are his notes. And handed the notes to the director and said, he informed the director. He goes, oh, yeah, well, I guess he did. The takeaway here is that protect yourself as a location sound person. Put it in the notes. Never put anything accusatory. Don't put anything in like I told the director and he decided to do it anyway and what a dumb decision. Just say you just informed the director or you told the first AD. If there's bad sound and there's a reason for it and you tried to correct it and you were overruled, put that in your notes because that will protect you because as you well know, Michael, I got my first location sound job and then I never looked for work after that. For 35 plus years I've been doing this. It's always one job or the next. So all you have that you take with you is your knowledge and your reputation. And you protect your reputation by those notes. Those are gold. I still have in the closet behind me in my office, I can go back 30 years and show you notebooks from location sound logs that I still have. I still keep. I don't know why I should throw them out, but at least keep them, while the film's in post-production. That's my tip.
Oh, that's good. I know you probably have a worst on-set experience. You don't have to give any names.
Yes, I can remember it to this day. It was a movie that I was working on, and I will not say the name of the movie or the director, but people sometimes ask me, about directors and stuff, and I say, in 35 years, I've been really lucky. Everyone I've ever worked with at IMAX has been wonderful, except for one director. All the space stuff I did was just wonderful. That was actually, and I'm going to give a shout out to Tony Myers and Judy Carroll, who were they call themselves the Space Girls, and they've been doing all the space films forever. And I followed them around the world, and I would drop anything I was doing to go work for them. But I was working on a film once. It was an IMAX film, and we were working on a scene, and I did a frame check for a fairly tight shot of a car. It was starting up. So I did a frame check with my cinematographer, frame check, and we play the you're in, you're out game. For those location sound guys, you know what I'm talking about. So you put your microphone in slow, you pull out, and he says you're in, and then you're out. And then I always tell my students as well, and anybody who'll listen, is that once you're out of frame, go another 10%. Go another 6 inches. 6 inches don't matter. It doesn't matter to a microphone. It'll matter if your mic dips into the shot. Okay. So this is pre-digital. We're shooting film on this film. So this is IMAX film. If your mic gets in a frame, we know in the digital world, if it dips in, then you just reframe it digitally and you can cheat, basically. Can't do that with film. So I checked my frame line. We shot the thing. We shot like 4 different shots. And so what happened was in the middle of the thing, and this was a cinematographer I'd worked with for years. He's a great cinematographer. Shall go nameless. This wasn't, well, let me finish the story. So he changed lenses on me, and he went wide, and he didn't tell me. Now, part of this was I've learned since then that I keep an eye on the AC, and I always tell the AC, make the AC your best friend. Buy them coffee the first day because they'll give you intel. Actually, your best friend is moose, is the key grip. Always, I'll tell you more about moose, and I have a theory about the key grips, but always, get in touch with the ACs because he changed lane. He went wide on me, and my mic was in the shot. And so we were on a film where we would go out and shoot for a month, and we'd go back and they'd post for a month and shoot for a month and post for a month. And this went on for about a year. There was a cycle to the whole film. And so he came back after one of the cycles, and this director called me out in front of everybody. In front of the crew. It was humiliating. And said something about, oh, there's Greg Smith. He ruined my film, he said, screams to everybody and bellowed out. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I was livid. It was a perfect shot, and you ruined it, and your microphone was in the shot, and so and so. And I remembered the day, and after he started yelling at me. I let him go on for a while, and I thought, okay, he's just going to say a couple of things. He kept going like that. So finally, I walked right up to him. He's a very tall, imposing guy, and I'm 5'9", so I'm not huge, but he was over 6 feet, big guy. And big bully, and was still young. So I went right up to him. My grandfather taught me this, go up to the biggest guy in the playground when you're a kid, and punch him in the nose. But I didn't punch him in the nose, but I did get right in his face. And I said, if you have a professional disagreement with me, let's go over here and talk about it, because this isn't doing you or me any good yelling at me in front of the crew. So I pulled him aside and I said, you either have a point or you don't. But don't ever talk to me like that again. I'm a professional. I'm doing a job. You're doing a job. You can fire me right now if you want to. And you'll have somebody here before the end of the day. But, I stood up for myself professionally. I said, you can't talk to me that way in front of the crew. And then he calmed down and he said, yeah, okay, you got a point. I was just mad and so, but you ruined the shot. And I went back through the shot when I found out by talking, I found out what happened. But, that dressing down stayed with me, and I finished the film. We worked. We were halfway through it at that point, so I stayed with him for another 6 months. But he's the one director I'll never ever work with again because of that moment. It was just humiliating. And still, at the end of the shoot, he wouldn't shake my hand goodbye. And I thought, you didn't get over that, did you? You've never had anybody call you on your S, as they say, And I called him. I called him on his behavior, and he didn't like that. And he backed down at that moment, but he stuck with it. And so. That's the only guy in 35 years I won't work with anymore. So that's a bad experience. Ugh. So it also taught me that check your frame line, check your frame line, check your frame line. Be good friends with the AC. The AC will say, hey, we're changing lenses, or hey, we're going wide, or hey, this, But the best friend you can make on a set is the key grip. And the first day, go find if you're a location sound person, first day, go find the key grip. Buy him a donut, get him coffee, learn the names of his kids, ask about them, because the key grip, no matter who says what, the call sheet is just a suggestion as to what may happen that day. We all know this. But the key grip knows when the camera's going to change and knows if the shot's going to change. He has to, because he's the one that moves the camera. So if you think you're going to shoot scene 26 Apple, and it's going to be a master shot over here in the parking lot, but the first AD said, oh, it's going to rain, so we're going to do the interior, so we're going to go to scene 32 Baker. And so you go in, so we're going inside. The key grip will know. Now, every grip, I swear to hand to God, 50% of the grips I've ever known have been called Moose. And they were all 6 feet, 3 inches tall. They all had necks like tree trunks. They all called me little buddy. I swear to God, 50% of them called Moose. But I would always, on the first day, I would always give coffee and a Pop-Tart to Moose, because Moose is the busiest guy on the set. They never get a break. They work through their lunches. The grips are, I'd like to say location sound people are the hardest working people on sets. It's really the key grip. He has an amazing amount of responsibility of building things and changing things, and it's always changed. But so he can't ever hit the craft service table. So I always carry Pop-Tarts. Carry whatever you want. But I had the Pop-Tart lecture. I give him my location sound class. This is a true thing. I always have Pop-Tarts, not just any Pop-Tart, but the brown frosted sugar cinnamon Pop-Tart. And that's the Pop-Tart because the jelly ones will melt in high heat. And I've done shoots in Death Valley where it gets to be 130 degrees or something. I've done shoots in the cold of China where it gets down to 20 below. The brown frosted sugar cinnamon ones, they won't melt. Those little silver wrappers, they'll last through a nuclear blast, and the cookie will fill you up, and the sugar, I'll make sure you get them frosted because the sugar will give you that little sugar boost. And I've found them in my kit, literally 2 years after a shoot, and I can still rip them open. I can still eat them,
Well, that's great. I love that.
So, but always make sure you give one to Moose, because if you do, then he will tell you in advance when the scene's going to change. That's my Pop-Tart tip for the day.
Oh, that's good. And what's one of the biggest eye openers for students when it comes to working in production sound? Maybe something they just didn't realize or didn't know, and they're in your class and just are like, what?
That's a really good question. It's the hurry up and wait activity on a set, which is that, especially as a sound person, I want to know where the camera's going to be because I want to get there early. I'm always an hour early to any set because I want to walk there with my ears, the most important part of my sound kit, and listen. Oh, if it's an interior, okay, the air handler's over there. So, as the camera crew, I say, yeah, I know you're going to do it in this corner, but there's this air conditioner here. If we move it to the other side of the stage, I can always recommend. I can't demand. And understand that as a sound person. But if you go over here, I can give you better audio. I always give choices. So, but it's the hurry up and wait thing. And you put your microphones out there and you can either wire up the actors or get ready with your boom operator. And if I'm doing boom or if I'm either self-booming or if I'm mixing or whatever, you're ready. Always be ready before camera is. It's always, the gaffer is always the last one. Always takes the longest to light. Lighting's always the thing that takes the longest. Sometimes, as you know, and most of your listeners will know, it takes sometimes hours to light a scene, sometimes hours. And what you have to do, it's like being a fireman, which is, it's hours of boredom punctuated by moments of terror is how I describe location sound. And so you have to be ready, and you've got to be ready to jump on it at that moment. But they don't, sometimes they'll lose their focus. And you can't sit there and read your phone, and you can't read the paper. You've got to have one of your eyes on your phone if you're checking your email, and the other eye in your head watching the set, and to know when to read the signals when the gaffer's almost done so you can tighten up. I say, tighten up, everybody on the sound crew. Here we go. And I can just tell, and you know this, is just you watch the camera crew. Slowly they drift back to their camera because the gaffer has told the key grip, again, Moose, who is then told the cinematographer, okay, we're almost ready. We're within 5 minutes. And so, you got to be ready to jump on it. You never want to hear those three dreaded words, waiting for sound. So, but there's a lot of waiting on a film set. And the first time that people are on a set, if they're doing location sound, they will always report back to me, God, I had no idea. I was on set for 12 hours and I think I maybe worked 20 minutes of that. And I'm like, yeah, but you know what? I always tell people, when I work on a set, what you're paying for, if you buy a Michael Helms to do your location sound, you're paying for, what he does in location, but plus, 30 years of experience or whatever it is, So that's the experience that how to operate on a set. And that's usually one of the biggest things that people discover when they get into the business, that you have to be on top of things and you got to know what's happening on a set, which means you have to know what the other jobs on the set are. Understand what a key grip does, understand what a gaffer does, understand what a cinematographer does, but don't get caught at the craft service table when it's time to roll.
Yeah, that's awful.
Yeah.
If some of our listeners wanted to get into location sound, what would you recommend they do?
Find out who's doing location sound near you. If you're in LA, you're surrounded by them. If you're in Savannah, there aren't many, but there are some people who do regular sound even down here in Savannah. There are more in big cities in New York, Chicago, LA, Atlanta, places like that. But find somebody who's local and then write them a fan letter. Write them an email. Get their email address. Sound people are like a notch just above the caterer in terms of respect on a set. I always tell people, sound is a great job, and I've loved every minute, well, maybe not every minute, but most minutes of, every location I've been on. I've traveled the world, and I've met great people, and I've been lucky to work with, some wonderful directors and wonderful situations. But when you're on a set, everybody goes up to the camera and wants to see the shot, right? Everyone looks through the lens, right? In your years of doing this, Michael, how many times has someone come up and said, can I listen with the microphone sound? What are you listening to? Does anyone ask to wear your headphones? And I'm not talking about the audio that you give to the director and, that in-house sort of thing. But as when you record a great sound, Michael, you just know it. It's like hitting the sweet spot on a 7-iron or a golf, or a tennis racket or something, or hitting that 3-point shot, and, you want to share it with somebody. Nobody on the set cares. Nobody knows. They don't care. So no one's ever listened to my headphones, and nobody cares about the sound people. So find out who the sound people are. If you're up and coming in the business, get yourself a job on a set as anything, like a PA, and then don't not do your job. But if you do have a break, get to know the sound person. Sound people, we are as a group incredibly insecure. I'm overstating it to make a point. I'm really not. But what I mean by that is that, nobody respects you on the set. We'll fix it in the mix. Your job on a sound set is record guide track, which is designed to be thrown away and replaced by ADR. Think about that. My job is to do something that is disposable. Now we all take great pride in it. My benchmark is always to record guide track that makes it to the screen. I always do that, and I'm sure you do the same thing. So get on a set and then get to know the sound people and ask them questions. Believe me, they will open their hearts. They will open their, find out. Look at the gear. Oh, that's a Sennheiser 414. Oh, I know that microphone. They'll be like, really? Nobody knows microphones. So find out a little bit about the gear. Listen to this podcast and listen to the wonderful people that come on and listen to them talk about the gear. I love that you asked about the gear straight out of the gate tonight, because I use a lot of the same gear I've used for years, punctuated by, a new recorder. But get to know the gear. Get to know what people are using. You talked about the new MixPre 10T. If you don't know what that is, ladies and gentlemen out there, go Google it and go to Sweetwater or one of the other great places. Call Stuart Niven in Sweetwater. I mentioned him twice now, but he's very knowledgeable, and find people who are knowledgeable. Ask them about their gear, but find the people who are on set. If you don't get a job on a set, write a fan letter to somebody. Somebody who does sound. Hey, I just watched an episode of The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu, and I saw you did location sound. Just curious, I'm up and coming in the industry. What kind of microphone did you use? for the, Elizabeth Moss's Handmaid's Costume or something. Ask them a question like that. We can do that easily. You can find email addresses on the web, and, you're reachable. We can find you. You can find me on my website. You can drop me an email. I'll answer questions from people out there. Just make sure you put something like location sound question in the email address, otherwise I get swamped or it goes to spam. But, most of us, the fact that you have this wonderful podcast means that you really care about it, and you take questions and you ask really good questions. And it's about the craft, because you and I and everyone out there, I'm sure, takes great pride in what we do. So if you're up and coming, realize that you're wanting to enter a fraternity, brothers and sisters, as we come into this fraternity of location sound people. I sound like a preacher now, brothers and sisters. But it really is. It's a small group of people who work really hard to do an impossible job that is designed to be thrown away. So, understand who you're contacting. Look at their IMDb profile, see what they've recorded, listen to the sound that they've recorded in the final mix, and then ask them a question about it and start a dialogue. And then once you get to know them, then you can, and this has worked for several of my students who have said, I've tried this and it worked. Then after you establish a dialogue and they hit you back, or not, but most of the time they will, say, hey, I'll be in the area. I would love to come and just sit on the sidelines and watch you do what you do. I won't ask any questions. I'll be a fly on the wall. But I think what you do is fascinating to me. And students have been, pleasantly surprised over and over again that, the location sound person who's never been asked what they do, much less what kind of gear they use, much less to be observed, much less to be heralded and celebrated as a professional in this field. Most of the time they'll say, yeah, it's kind of a busy, it's a close set, but maybe you can come for a morning. And then you go, and then you have a good day, and then you just basically start a relationship with them. Say, well, if you ever need an auxiliary or utility person, I know how to coil cable, I know how to clean gear, I know all about the recorder that you're using. I've been through the menu. Do your homework, learn about the gear that they have, and go online and get the PDF of the owner's manual and devour it. Remember that story I told earlier on about learning to use the nogger? Sure, I know how to use one. I went down, and the first thing I did is pulled it. We didn't have online then. There was no online then, so it was just the manual. And I devoured the manual. I spent all night. By midnight that night, I went over to my friend's house and recorded the distributor cap coming off, because I sat there and I read the manual. You can do that now easily. So find out the gear that the person's using, and then ask them a question about it.
Good stuff. I like that. So, well, Greg, as we kind of are wrapping things up here, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Through my website, there's an email address. There's an email link. Don't do it till about the 1st of October. I don't know when you're going to air this, but I'm in the midst of changing over my email server. So the old email address has gotten too clogged with spam and stuff, and it just disappears. I'll say, but there's an email. Click here to email me. I think I want to make sure the link's up. So probably not safe till October 1st. But after that, you can click on that link. The website is www.prosfromdover, PROSFROMDOVER Productions, plural, one long word, .com. Or if you just search, Greg Smith IMAX or Greg Smith Lucasfilm or Greg Smith SCAD, it'll probably pop something up. If you send me an email, I'm happy to talk with whomever is out there. Remember that I've got like a studio that I'm running, and I'm promoting an album and I'm teaching, which means I'm kind of crazy. If I don't hit you back right away, just be patient. I will try to get you back. If you send me something and you don't hear back after a couple of weeks, maybe it went to spam. So send me a second one, but wait a couple of weeks before you do that. And then the third thing is put something in the subject line which will jump out. Podcast question. Put Michael Helms podcast in the subject line. And that way I'll see that, and I'll know that that's something coming from someone who heard this. Like I say, if I can answer the question, I don't get job openings, so I couldn't help you get a job. But I'm happy to talk with you about the gear and geek out with you. The other thing I will say also is I'm not very much of a geeky kind of a gearhead. Some people are, and I depend on them because I'm not. It's evidenced by the fact that my two favorite mics in the field are 30-year-old mics. but they still work great. If you're going to ask me about the finer points of version something of, some microphone or the response characteristics, the frequency response characteristics of a certain mic, I probably don't know. But if you want to talk about theory or about, certain other things like that, question about that, I'm happy to talk with anybody out there. And if you can't get through to me, get through to Michael, and then he'll bug me and I'll hit you back. How about that?
Perfect. Well, Greg, this has been fantastic, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share your stories. You've had some amazing experiences over the years in the industry, and this has been very inspiring.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and I was very flattered and honored that you included me in your podcast, and I can't wait to hear it on the air.
And a big thanks to all of our listeners out there. If you'd like us to discuss a particular topic, please send us an email at locationsoundpodcast@gmail.com. We would love for you to subscribe and leave us a comment. We're available on Apple Podcast, and for Android users, check out Google Podcast. Also, we're on Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, and on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, remember, sound is half the picture.